personal views and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. This is the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, where we discuss data privacy issues with industry leaders around the world with information that businesses need to know now. I have a special guest on the show, all the way from the DC metro area, Julie Schroeder. She is a General Counsel, Chief Legal Officer, Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning thought leader. Hello.
Hey, it's nice to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you on the show. You and I are connected on LinkedIn. You've dropped some knowledge bombs on LinkedIn, and you and I decided that we wanted to chat, and we had so much fun talking. We thought, you should be on the podcast. I really like people who understand legal and really understand the data side of stuff. And I feel like you really understand that. And I think that's why we get along so well. But tell me about your career journey, your interests, not only in law, but your data interests.
So I did 15 years as a trial and appellate attorney. End of the appellate attorney was Supreme Court cases. My last Supreme Court case is Philip Morris versus Williams, which established the punitive damages in the United States, and it's still the case law. I was 7 months pregnant. The only other women in the court were Sandra Day O'Connor, RBG, and Nina Totenberg. So after that, I was trying to decide what to do next, and someone said, this company is looking for a general counsel. And I said to him, Brad, do I look like a 40-year-old white man from an M&A department of a big law firm to you? And he said, no, you don't, but they've been looking for a year. So there's no dearth of them. They're clearly looking for something else. And that is how I ended up having my first general counsel job. And I call it like a Forrest Gump kind of way, like you're there and at the right time. They were using natural language processing in healthcare for data. And I didn't have a lot of experience, but in order to, I thought, do the company justice in risk management and making sure that we're, getting ownership of the right things, I went through the patent with the data scientists so I could understand where data comes, goes, transforms, where they use regexes and why, the tokenization process and that whole thing. And then went back and realized that the natural language processing with a human in the loop needed data ownership because we were obviously making our product better with the data that we got from every customer. And that's kind of how it started. Also, healthcare. So I was doing a BAA or a BA agreement. And I realized that some of the BA agreement, which is as you know, a floor, not a ceiling, needed to be changed. I needed to have a right to do this to the data. And I also needed to exempt myself from it being infeasible to return or destroy. So that's where I started. And I was at that company for 7 years before it was bought by 3M. And 3M made me the transition executive, which, the general counsel is, so often I'm joking that transition executive, like never happens. Usually like with the CFO, you kind of are asked to leave quickly, but I ended up as the general counsel of 3M HIS. And if you want to talk data and what's being done with it, that's a cornucopia of different uses. So I expanded my knowledge, and I do that by just talking to the developers, the data scientists. I can't walk by a whiteboard without asking, what is that? What does it do? How does it work? And I guess I'm just a curious sort. I didn't really have a tech background. I love learning, and I love learning about this. And so it continued to add to my knowledge base. And in additional jobs that I took, I made sure that AI, ML, or analytics were part of what the company was doing. So I could continue to apply and expand that knowledge base with different models. The first NLP model was a multiple matrix regression. I've also done LDAs, use information a little bit differently, and I had to learn about that. And, I continue to go to this day. I work the same way. And I love this topic because it is so complex. I like a good puzzle to solve. And it's so complex because you can't just say it's a privacy thing, it's a security thing, it's an intellectual property thing, it's a contract law thing, it's a third party license thing. It's all of them. Depending on what you're doing with the data in your model, it's all of them all at the same time. So in 2016, I know this is very odd for a lawyer, but I co-founded NLP and qual analytics company with a data scientist and someone who had been doing analytics for a long time. That went well. We sold it March 3rd, 2020, which was very lucky timing. And I know that's odd, but I got to use not only my tech skills, but my business skills and my legal skills all at the same time, because I was doing the business strategy and the selling and the raising capital, and I hadn't done that before. So I think that when you throw me back as a general counsel, again, that makes me a better general counsel. I call myself a generalist, which seems to be a thing now. It was not when I started. In fact, I was told not to do that because everyone picks their attorneys by subject matter area. And if you're a generalist, you are not going to be able to get a job, which I ignored because I didn't want to be stuck just doing one thing. Again, I like doing a lot of different things. And so along with the tech, I'm a generalist in all of the different internal verticals and the problems that can arise. And I say I have deep subject matter expertise because I've really gotten into it the way I've gotten into AI and data. So I apparently did all the wrong things. And then I am before you now.
Yeah. Wow. I feel you. I understand you a lot. I think I'm similar in that way. People ask me, why don't you call yourself the privacy diva? It's because data is the core of what I'm interested in, right? So I can go in any direction. I'm just choosing at this moment to focus on privacy. I think it's just fascinating to me. I think people like you are the future of corporations because you need to move away from the idea that a company is like Santa's workshop. So everyone has their little fragmented thing that they do, and magically some toy pops out at the end. And that's just not the way it works, right? Because data is the lifeblood of organizations and is running through all parts of an organization. So if you don't have people who understand that and also know how to talk to people in different groups, you're not going to be a successful organization. So I think people like you are vital to the future of corporations.
Thank you. The same to you.
Oh,
And one of our first conversations, I said I reached out because you call yourself a privacy lawyer, but you're obviously got an expertise in a lot of other things, which, I would love to talk about. As far as being the future of corporations, it's quite funny right now because I get a lot of interest from LinkedIn, but if I would apply to a position, it would be very hard for a recruiter a recruiter is a checkbox exercise. And I am very confusing to recruiters because she's a lawyer, but she started her own tech company, but she's a founder. That just doesn't compute. And the really funny thing is if you use AI to parse resumes, which a lot of companies are doing now, then they're using generative AI. I will never be picked because of perplexity. Perplexity, as you know, is the statistical correlation and probability of things that go together. And, the dog was on a leash is an easy one, but a woman who's a chief legal officer, who's a generalist, who knows tech and had a tech company does not make sense.
Right. And one thing people don't understand about AI is like a machete, it's not a scalpel. So it doesn't understand those nuances that a human would need to assess. So I think that's accurate.
Yeah.
Uh,
I find that ironic.
yeah, totally. What is it about AI that people don't understand? So, well, this is a funny thing. This is a joke that you and I talked about. Now, because of generative AI, now everyone's talking about AI. Now everyone's an AI expert. People weren't really thinking about it before a lot of this generative stuff hit the news or hit like mainstream media. And so it's kind of funny and weird to see everyone become an AI expert all of a sudden. Hadn't really thought about it, but what are some of the misconceptions, or maybe one of the big misconceptions that people need to understand about AI?
Um, so we talked about this a little bit before. So first of all, AI did not spontaneously generate 6 to 8 weeks ago. I actually just wrote a post on this. Generative AI dates back to the 1950s and 60s, depending on who you're looking at and what they did. And NLP, or machine learning and natural language processing, started in the 1970s at DARPA. The problem was at the time that computers were not sophisticated enough to be able to parse the way that we needed to. And also, we had to find a way to deal with human language, because that's why it failed originally, because of the idioms and the expressions and the way they use things. It's all math, the statistical probability correlations to make sense. We're at an inflection point. Generative AI in the past year has made some strides due to being able to tag better, being able to, understand data better, but it's not new. And it's iterative, like any technology is iterative. So that's the first part. And the second part is AI is a category, not a thing. You're either using machine learning, natural language processing, that's visual, generative AI. There's a lot of different categories, and they're all being used right now by different companies to great effect. And I think it's the proper application of the right kind of AI, I call it a flavor, to your data, and then your goal that you have to, decide when you're game boarding it and you're thinking about how to do it. It's the data. Where did the data come from? How are you going to use the data? How are you going to use the data in AI? And I'm separating those intentionally because people seem to have a notion that data and AI are one thing, and they're not. It's data sets, or LLMs, that have propelled generative AI in the last year to be as good as it is. And data sets have their own, you have to go through the whole thing. You have to go through where did the data come from? Do I own it? How can I use it? Does a third party have rights? You have to check all of those. Are there contracts where I'm supposed to give that data back if they terminate? If so, how am I going to do that? All of those things are not AI. It's just data. It's big data. We've all been working with big data for decades. Now you add AI to that, and you have to ask those questions again, only you're asking them, slightly differently. And you're asking also about security, privacy, intellectual property, contract law again, and data ownership and use. So they overlap on a Venn diagram, but they're two very different things. And I haven't seen a lot of people cotton on to that. I get more of the feeling, and this was the joke that I made, that people think AI is magical pixie dust that you can just sprinkle on something and it gives you a 10x in your valuation. That's not the case. And also, it's not the case that it's fantastic and it's going to save the world and do everything for us. It's also not the case of the opposite, that it's going to cause the robot apocalypse and everyone's going to be replaced and people aren't going to have a job again. That is very, very black and white. And this is not black and white technology. It is gray. All of your answers are in the gray.
Wow. I never thought about it that way. I think that's all true. I guess when I think of it, the best way I can describe it, I think of generative AI as a evolution as opposed to a revolution, right? So to me, it's an evolution in computing. So, like you say, it's not a new thing. It is just the newest version, the newest improvement or iteration of a thing. And then also when people say things like, oh, generative AI is like the invention of the internet or the smartphone or something, I think of it as like a washing machine where it's going to have a horizontal impact on almost any type of industry if people use it the right way, right? So for the capabilities it has now, it's not human, it's not humanoid, it's not sentient, it's not going to be sentient. But for people who understand the technology, understand what it can do, I think they'll be able to definitely go far. But you touched on something that I think is very important and that people may not realize when they try to move into digital transformation with AI products, and that is the importance of data lineage, where I feel like a lot of companies, the way they handle data now is like, okay, we have like data's in a castle, we lock the castle, we have to protect everything in the castle, but companies never had to truly consider where the data came from, right? So I think a lot of it was the assumption that, okay, we have the data in our possession. We have a right to have the data that's in our possession and we can do whatever we want to with it. But now companies are going to have to really check that data lineage issue, and they have to make sure that the data that they have, that they should have. What are your thoughts?
I've heard people call this many things lately: data lineage, data ownership. It's basically data, and can you use it, and do you own it? It's really quite simple. And yes, a lot of companies have data and have not thought about the data, and there's like data, basically data on the floor, and they have to figure out what they're going to do with it. But the companies that I've been in, because of that extra analytics and machine learning AI component, have been very different. I've had a very different experience because data is everything. The data and where it goes and how you use it and how you power it is everything. And I also agree with you that what we're looking at is a tool. I like the washing machine. And I agree that, and I think it focuses on that when you're picking your goal has to be something that's more automated. It can't be something that's very complex and nuanced, because that's not going to go well. So if you're talking healthcare, and I've seen people say this is going to revolutionize healthcare and generative AI is going to give the diagnosis to people, I'm sitting here going, no, that's never going to happen.
Right.
But can it save time and automate tasks? Absolutely. That's the whole point of its creation. Its creation is, was to help to make things faster and automate tasks. And your take on generative AI being an evolution is absolutely correct. I think this past year with near sentient chatbots, I mean, they're getting quite good, and large data sets and the ability to tag data better, in addition to computer processing just being much, much, much faster and parses the complex better. It's led to where we are now. But it's a tool. It's just a tool. If you look at a Boolean curve, right? You've got the people who think that the tool can do everything, the people who think that the tool should never be used because it's evil. And then you have the middle, which is some ideas of how you could use it. But this whole 6 to 8 weeks ago, when people were like, AI is here, we're having AI hackathons, come join us. I was like, what is an AI hackathon? Like, what the heck would that even be? Like, what are you guys doing? So, I'm with you on that. And the sudden appearance of AI expertise on people's resumes lately, I think that's problematic mainly because I think a lot of the people who are doing the hiring don't know enough about the topic. And so if someone is very, very loud about their expertise, even though that they've had, no experience and they're using the right buzzwords over and over and over again, they're going to get selected. And how is anyone going to know that they're not doing what they should be doing? It's going to take a while. And in 2 years, they'll find out that they've made no progress and still have the same risk profile. That's what I'm really worried about.
I agree with that. Two things that you said that are very spot on, of course. And so one is I agree about a lot of people deciding they want to hang their hat on the AI arms race, right? But I feel like even though it may take time to find out that someone may not know what they're talking about, in my view, it's not a fake it till you make it thing, because eventually the truth will come out. You actually have to do things. You can't just think. You can't just think and can't talk. There has to be some action behind that. But then also, back to your medical example, I am thoroughly horrified when I see those articles like, oh, AI is going to cure cancer and it's going to do diagnosis. And I'm like, that's not even the appropriate use for the tool, right? So you're basically saying, you want the tool to take over human judgment, right? And it can't do that. It's not made to be a way to abdicate your human responsibility. I think my greatest fear was always that people would abdicate their human judgment to AI. And that's actually what's happening. And I'm horrified by that. So what are your thoughts?
That's how people are talking. But those are, when we talked about the Boolean curve, like those are the people who are AI will be able to do everything far left. And my thoughts are, I completely agree with what you're saying. It's never going to be able to approximate human judgment. And you're going to try. You're not going to use generative AI. You're going to use NLP, the human in the loop with semantic analysis, sentiment analysis, as close as you can come that I'm aware of now. And even that makes mistakes. So let's talk about that. There is an error rate. The way that tech calls it, data scientists call it hallucinations. I use error rate because it's a little easier to understand. And back in 2007, when no one was using this and Harry Potter had just come out, we called the mistakes howlers because the machine, it makes mistakes in ways that humans can't understand. So if someone is trying to code like neck bone, for example, it's very likely to code for the thigh. And a human would look at that and be like, the whole examination was about the neck. This is horrible. This is terrible technology, and it doesn't make any sense. And this example is completely off. And the example is what happens when machines make mistakes. That's what it looks like. It doesn't look like when humans make mistakes, which should be your first clue that it can't replace humans.
Yeah. I want to go deep on a data theory with you. And this is something that I think is problematic in AI and the way people use it in a way, because some of these systems are programmed to give you answers, even if they are not right, right? So where maybe a human, maybe wouldn't be able to give you an answer, the AI will probably give you an answer, even if it's not right. And so maybe that's not a problem. Let's say you're shopping for a dress online, it gives you like the wrong dress. You're not harmed by that. And you may be annoyed, right? But like if you're trying to use these systems to pinpoint a person who robbed a store or did a crime, right? First of all, the potential harm level is astronomical, right, to that person. And then the accuracy isn't there, right? Because it's trying to give you the best answer, not necessarily the exact answer. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that all gets back to error rate. And when you're thinking about your goal and how you want to use a particular type of AI, you have to also think about percentage of error rate are you looking at. Generative AI tends to have a higher one depending on the models that are out now, which we don't need to go through. Certain natural language processing types have smaller ones, but even if it was less than 2%, you have to go, are you comfortable with getting 2% or less of these answers wrong? So when it's identifying a human being for crime, no, I am not comfortable with that. When it's a diagnosis, I am not comfortable with that. As you say, it can't replace human judgment. And so one of the things that you have to do, I think, is flip it on its head and say, okay, what judgment does this do and how does it do it? And what are you looking at in terms of hallucinations, error rates? And is that acceptable as a risk? And a lot of things, it is acceptable. It's where you draw that line, I think, that becomes important.
Right. If 2% error means two people went to jail, that's not acceptable. Maybe that 2% are you got the 2% of the wrong item that you look for on a website. That may be acceptable, right? So I think you're saying that that's true. Also, I want to talk a little bit about AI audits. So AI audits now are going to be like the rage. We're seeing laws being passed around doing some type of due diligence around AI. Definitely a lot of this has started in Europe. We're seeing that come over to the US in certain places, maybe not even called audits, but like assessments and things like that. One thing that concerns me about data and how people use it is when you're trying to come up with human logic to try to figure out how do I get the best result. There are holes in our logic because there are blind spots that maybe we don't think about in data, right? So we're programmed to try to do the best to find our answer, but sometimes the best way to find an answer is to ask the opposite question. Have I gone too deep here?
No, not at all. I think you're spot on with that piece. They need to understanding where the data came from, but what the data is. Let's talk generative AI. Ethics and bias are, surprise, the same thing. They are used as they are separate things. And while they're taking the forefront, they're not the first or second or third thing I would look at. But in your question, they are important. So, the data set has an inherent bias. If someone's scraping the web, there will be bias against women. There will be bias against many things. And Google came out fairly early and said that it's introducing unlearning bias, which is a person's going to go in and look at the things that are biased and fix it, which is a biased person is going to go in and try and solve for bias. That does not work. You cannot do that. There is no way that I know of to counteract bias. You just have to deal with it being there when you use it and then figure out how you're going to use it in a way that is not as much of a problem.
Wow, that's a deep answer. I love that. I love these data thought things. I have another deep question that I want to ask you, or something I want to propose to you, which irritates me to no end. So here's a scenario. Let's say a town has a red light camera program, and they put cameras on the south side of the city, but not the north. Okay. So the statistics that they get from that, they may interpret that as there's less crime on the north side than the south side. To me, that's one of the ultimate data problems, which is an absence of data. You're making an assertion based on an absence of data. You're not feeding that into the equation. What are your thoughts?
That's an excellent point, and I haven't heard anyone bring this up. But that is, again, it goes back to your starting point, which is what exactly is your data and what are its limitations. You need to understand those kinds of things because human beings have a tendency, like you said, their blind spots will translate into these kinds of things, like, north side, south side, and they only had cameras on one side and then they drew a conclusion from it. I could see a human being doing that quite easily as well. So you have to consider the completeness and complexity of the data set you're using for particular types of AI in order to avoid that absence of data skewing the results.
I love this. I could talk to you for hours.
I think you've done that before.
Yes, yes, this is so much fun. If it were the world according to you, Julie, and we did everything you said, what would be your wish for data, privacy, legal, human behavior? What are your thoughts there?
I would just love, again, going back to that Boolean curve, let's just take a holistic approach, please. And also separate the data. We talked about this from the type of AI that you're using, because each deserves a separate analysis that, overlaps on a Venn diagram, but still you need to ask the questions. Oh, data lineage and data provenance are the two things that have come up recently, which make me laugh because I've only heard data provenance in healthcare. And that's, going back to what patient we're using. But that's now being used instead to talk about data use rights and ownership. I think that's confusing. We need to be using the same methodology, so that's the holistic part, but also using the same terminology. A lot of it is being randomly made up at this point in time. I don't know what it means sometimes. And that is something that could be easily remediated. But the holistic approach is there's no one thing you need to look for. You need to look for, we talked about use, the type of data, the quality, the, complexity, where it came from, ownership, rights. And then there's, if you're going to take that data, so you figured that part out. So now you're going to take that data set or LLM and you're going to use some type of AI, you've got to go through the whole thing again. And then you add privacy, security, IP, contract law, third-party licenses, and a bunch of other things. You have to look at all of those. So a lot of companies right now, they're hiring for someone to fix this problem. And I don't think they know what to call it. So they're also using different titles. Like, we need a product attorney who does this. We need a privacy attorney who does this. And for me, if you had an attorney that was a kind of one note flavor, you've got a problem because you're not going to have a holistic approach to what you're doing. But people are catching up. So I think those things would be the ones that I would like to tackle. And Then the last one is an understanding of that kind of appropriateness for a task. I'd like there to be some consensus on that.
I agree. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Wow. I'm so glad we got a chance to do this. I'm sure that this episode will be very illuminating, as it was for me. It's fun for me to talk, geek out about data stuff. Thank you.
Anytime you want to geek out about data stuff, I'm your girl.
Thank you so much. I'm sure we'll talk soon. Thank you. Thank you.
I enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay.